Good evening.
Hi, folks. Welcome.
We'll be starting formally in less than a minute, but I am very glad to see you. And as always, I will ask you straight away to start typing in the chat box, to introduce yourself. I see some new faces, which is lovely. So for everyone who joins us, my name is Dr. Julia Budnik. I'm one of the directors of SDS Seminars, and my co-director and the founder of SDS Seminars is Professor Paul Grantham, and he will be presenting or talking to us today. And now let's move on to the other course which we're discussing today, and it's the course on the 1st of April. And although it's supposed to be a fun day, 1st of April, we've chosen the topic which is not very fun, which is feeling out of control. And again, I think it's the overwhelming feeling that many of us experienced in the last couple of years and continue experiencing now. And so my first question to you, Paul, about this topic. Why have you decided to add it to certificate on working integrated CBT for non-diagnostic problems? And it sounds very broad. So what happens when the client comes and tells you that they are feeling out of control?
Right, yeah, I mean, good question, Julia. I was actually thinking about this particular topic earlier on this week in contrast with the other modules in this particular certificate. And it struck me both in terms of the ones that we've already covered and the ones that we're going to be covering in the future after this particular one. Without a shadow of a doubt, this is the most heterogeneous topic that's around. So what I mean by that is that we may well have, and I'm sure we do have, many clients who come to us and describe feeling out of control. But unlike other topic areas, whether it be, imposter syndrome or perfectionism or self-esteem or whatever, this is a concept of feeling out of control, which is extraordinarily broad and has extraordinarily different meanings for people. And that's so if I can just give you some different sort of examples of that to show how broad it actually is. The example that you've just actually mentioned already, which is the idea about feeling out of control at the moment, and that's obviously in connection with feeling out of control, first of all, with regards to COVID, and then in addition to that, there's that issue of feeling out of control because of what's actually happening in Ukraine. And I suppose that the first thing to emphasize about that is that when individuals say they feel out of control there, what they're most commonly talking about is actually feeling that events that are around them are out of control and unpredictable. You get very similar sorts of complaints with folks who say, I feel out of control, when they've experienced multiple losses, for example. So that's one element of it, of which I'll come back to this later on. One part of it, and which is quite central, can I say, is the whole sense of feeling that I can't predict the world. I can't predict the world, and maybe I don't feel I can predict myself in some ways. So we've got those sorts of feeling out of control issues. Then we've got folks who will talk about feeling out of control in a very much more specific context. So it's quite a common complaint, for example, for people who experience panic attacks to talk about feeling out of control. And that's often about something which is quite different. That's actually about feeling that they might be going mad, or that they're going to collapse or whatever, and that their bodies are going to do something, and they themselves might do something which would be either catastrophic or enormously embarrassing. And then we've also got other complaints about feeling out of control. So I can think, for example, specifically of working with clients with anger problems who suffer from temper loss. And they will say, I feel out of control, I just don't know what the hell it is I'm actually doing, and so on and so forth. And a sort of similar element to that is obviously there are some people who will complain of feeling out of control when they self-harm, for instance. They can't stop themselves. And so what we've actually got here is an extraordinarily broad range of different experiences which individuals use under that general heading of feeling out of control. So that actually makes it, I think, first of all, I suppose the most important thing I would emphasize here is that unlike many of the other modules that we've actually looked at in this particular certificate, this is not one where it's possible to have a single advisory approach in terms of how you actually tackle it, because it actually relates to quite a very broad array of different types of problem. And the implication of that, obviously, is that assessment and exploration of what the individual actually means by feeling out of control is absolutely central, because it is very, very easy indeed for individual practitioners to be making assumptions about this, which in reality are just wrong, but can actually take you off in totally the wrong direction. Let me just give you two very quick examples of that, and how, if you were taking the wrong approach, could be absolutely catastrophic for the work that you do with your client. So you could be working with somebody who is complaining about the fact that they feel out of control and they might stab somebody. The practitioner, for a whole range of reasons, automatically tends to assume that there is a big risk issue attached to this, which they either have to assess or manage or whatever. There are some circumstances where that's the case, but there are other circumstances where that sort of complaint, and to view it as a risk case, is not only wrong, but actually likely to compound the problem. And yet, on the other hand, we could have other individuals who say, I just feel I can't cope with my young child. I feel out of control. I don't know what I'm going to do. And it is seen in that particular context as something where the individual primarily needs support and help, and where the whole question of risk assessment is left to one side and is not actually conducted. So that's why it can be quite a complicated area, and why the assessment and the way in which, or the meaning that actually is attached to this and the background to it is so central to the work that's going to be done.
From what you're saying, Paul, my immediate inclination would be that it requires good classification or algorithm. You know, what types of out of controls are out there, and sort of a little bit, would you say, a bit of guidance how to approach different types? Are you going to cover
Totally. I mean, although this certificate is about non-diagnostic problems, I think that this is probably one of those areas where diagnosis can actually play a role in guiding what sort of approach you actually take. That's one particular thing I would emphasize. It's not a diagnostic problem, but the approach you take is, to some extent, in some context, guided by that. I think the other thing that I would say about this is, it's really crucial that we as a practitioner have an understanding about what the client themselves actually means by feeling out of control, rather than making automatic assumptions about what meaning that we attach to that, and assuming that it's shared by the client, because this can actually mean incredibly diverse things. But unless you know how to actually explore that and ascertain what the central issues actually are, then it's not going to be possible to actually do the right thing. And as I say, potentially it can be quite sort of dangerous. So you're quite right, there needs to be some sort of algorithm or guidance in terms of the way in which you approach this. there needs to be the ability to explore with the client what this actually means. There's some other key distinctions which I would sort of highlight at the moment, and which we're going to unpackage in a lot of detail when we actually do this particular course. One of which is about the degree to which the individual is talking about what's occurring around them, and the degree to which the individual is talking about themselves. And there's obviously instances where both can apply, but there's also a lot of instances where the client themselves may confuse that, and also the practitioner might. I've mentioned risk assessment, and we'll say a little bit about that as well. It's not going to be a detailed training on risk assessment, but there's some key points that I just want to raise about that, which should influence our decision making. In some instances, can I just say, there are also questions of motivation that need to be addressed. I mean, we're talking here about the experience of feeling out of control as if it is exclusively negative. And undoubtedly for a large number of people it actually is, but there is some meaning that's attached to that for some folks, where there are some positive elements to it. For some people will, for example, experience feeling out of control as a sense of release. They will experience that sense of being out of control, of no longer being responsible, of being liberated from rules. So that's a real issue, because you may not necessarily find that everybody who's complaining about feeling out of control necessarily wants to automatically do something about it. So we'll be looking at that as a particular issue. There are some things which are very straightforward. You know, there are some things where, to be honest with you, psychoeducation is all that's actually required, and we'll be looking at the instances where that is the case. And I can think of a number of instances where I've worked with clients where they've come along feeling absolutely devastated and feeling that all sorts of terrible things are going to be happening to them, and that they're going to be doing all sorts of terrible things. And actually some very simple psychoeducational approaches within a single session have been quite sufficient to make a difference. We've got certain things that underlie practically all of this particular stuff, which I've sort of already mentioned, which is about the general concern that the individual has that they can no longer predict things, whether that's predicting my behavior or predicting what's going on around me, you know, and that whole issue of prediction, which is often strongly associated, by the way, with the idea of problems with control, is one that I think almost invariably needs to be addressed. And there's a number of ways in which that can be addressed that are well established, certainly within the CBT field, that I'll be looking at and sharing with people in terms of how they can actually use them. And then there's finally some basic things really, where I guess, putting it very bluntly, the feeling of being out of control actually has a strong validity to it. You know, these are individuals who I will broadly describe as being very anxious about the fact that they are highly impulsive and have difficulties controlling their own behavior, and do have difficulties controlling their own behavior. And so that in many ways is what will be broadly termed an arousal problem. And we'll be looking at some short-term effective techniques, basically, rather than the strategies that we can use with clients to enable them to immediately feel more in control when there is actually a real risk here of crossing over a threshold. So I know we're going to be dealing with all of this within a two-hour slot, but we'll be touching on a whole range of things which I just know will be of practical use. And I think most importantly, can I say, give practitioners more confidence about how to actually get to grips with individuals who we all see all the time, who come to us and say, I just feel out of control.
Thank you, Paul. It was interesting because as you were talking, I had so many things which all both confirmed what you were saying and further thoughts. Well, the first thing you said about feeling out of control might be experienced as a positive emotion or feeling. And you know, I'm a big Harry Potter fan, and there is a curse in Harry Potter which is called Imperious Curse, when somebody's mind is captured by the cursor, and they are made to do what the other person wants. And it is described when Harry Potter was put on the Imperious Curse, originally was described as the most blissful feeling, that you are not responsible for anything at all. You are just completely out of the picture. So I can imagine that it can be experienced like that. Another thing, we've just done the 3 days with Deanne Jade on eating disorders in adolescence. And I was just thinking that very often people will not come to us with a complaint that they feel out of control, but they will come to us with anorexia or bulimia. And that is actually a manifestation of that very feeling. So it very often might be an underlying problem, not something what they will necessarily be aware of, but you will actually discover it as you start working with the client. And through what you were describing, clearly you already started putting it into that sort of classification and the algorithm, which hopefully will help us to find our right way in that area. Yeah, sorry, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing about, I mean, and maybe it's stating it a bit too strongly to talk about the pleasure of being out of control. You know, if you take something like binge eating, for example, yes, there is an enormous amount of shame that occurs once you've completed this and are immediately reflecting on it. But at the time, there is actually, for many people, a sense of loss of self. You know, they enter into that particular experience. And equally, a very different sort of process about the pleasure of loss of control reminds me very much of some work that was done a few years ago, which looked at the very interesting question, which I never realized actually existed, which is, why do most fights occur late at night on Fridays? Certainly within the UK, they do. And one of the things that this particular paper explored was the fact that Elton John was wrong. You know, Saturday night is not all right for fighting. It's actually Friday night, which is all right for fighting. And the reason for that is Friday night is the time when we are released from all the rules that operate in our normal day-to-day life, and people have a sense of liberation. And they give themselves over in some instances to basically being in a position where they enjoy feeling that they're losing control. Yeah. And can I hasten to add, to make an obvious point here, are able to say that I'm not responsible when they do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Or everyone went and I went with them. Yeah. Before I open for questions, I've noticed, Akash, your hand, just put it down because it is a little disruptive. But everyone else, please. Yeah, I've noticed it. Yes, and everyone else, if you want to write your questions in the chat box or put your hand up as well as Akash did, please do. But before I open up for questions, I want to ask the last question of my own, Paul. On another level, are we ever in control? Because we think we are, but actually there's very little in life which is within our control on day-to-day basis.
Well, I would argue against that, and I would say that there are certain things within our control, and there's a large number of things that are not within our control. And the one thing that we probably have got more control over is our own behavior. And we have substantially less control over other people's behavior or over events that are occurring around us. So we can exercise greater control over ourselves than we can over things which are external to us. I think that there's another issue here as well, which is whatever the reality is of how much control we've actually got, it seems pretty clear that we have a psychological need as human beings to have the experience of being in control, or at least have the need to be able to frame the world and frame our behavior and others' behavior within some sort of concept whereby that we can control. And there's different types of control, aren't there? There's, I know that the people that are around me, I can't strictly speaking control them, but what I can control to some degree, I'd like to think, as we all like to think, is that we can predict what they're going to do. So we can't necessarily control them in the sense of stopping them, but we feel we can predict. And I think it comes back to that issue again, that when we have strongly held beliefs about things being predictable, and we are then confronted by things around us that don't fit that pattern, that's really difficult. That's really difficult for us. And it's obviously one of the key reasons why, you have unique events like the pandemic. You have pretty unique events, certainly within our lifetimes, largely, of invasions into other countries, that things become, or they feel, less predictable, and we feel that we're not in control. So I think it's variable. But again, as we're going to be seeing when we actually run this, the whole question of predictability and beliefs about the need for control are central to being able to tackle this.
I've added the link to the Feeling Out of Control course to the chat box. Once again, it's on the 1st of April. It's very easy to find on our website. And we will take a break with SDS Thursdays as well until the 21st of April. So we'll meet again on the 21st of April. And we are starting the next term with a very interesting Thursday. It will be on trauma-informed practice. So I hope you will all join us on the 21st of April at 7 o'clock, as always, and we will run the full day course, or rather two half days course on trauma-informed practice in May. So please do come and have a taster session on 21st of April. Until then, you can unmute yourself and say your goodbyes, and I hope you have very nice Easter break. Bye-bye.
Take care, folks. Look after yourselves.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you
very much.
Bye.